we're going to get into your personal story a little bit later here, but I think generally maybe we could talk about the yew tree first and kind of set the outline of what this is for people who are living in areas where the yew tree cannot be found, and we can explain a little bit about where it is, how it looks, and basically how you got onto this track in terms of your personal story. But tell us just a little bit about the yew tree first, Michael.
Well, thanks, Henrik. It's a delight to be on the show, and I love the work you're doing. So, yeah, the yew tree is a very fascinating being, and the yew tree is left to its own devices without any human tampering. The yew tree is potentially an immortal tree, which is one very significant aspect of the tree that has always fascinated me. And the trees that are existing now, and very few of them left in their what would have been their natural state. There are very few of those now, and I was very fortunate to come across one, or to be led to one, let's say, in the southeast of Scotland. And the yew tree is, when they're left to their own devices, they'll tend to grow back down towards the ground. So literally they are the tree that grows upwards and downwards at the same time, as it's reflected in the yew rune, the 13th rune. And what happens is that the tree creates clones of itself that grow back into the ground and create basically, essentially new growth. So they continuously regenerate themselves. So the yew tree is an example to us humans of a continual process of regeneration and continuous healing. And I think that's something that we should really be paying attention to, and as a symbol, but also as a hopeful connection with the natural world.
Yeah, I see some similarities between when I look at the yew tree and the juniper tree. Do you know if there's any relation there between these two trees?
I think there's some kind of relationship, but not being a sort of an arborist. I mean, I'm not exactly sure of the connections, but you can certainly from a distance you can certainly often mistake them, and but there are definite differences. I don't think the juniper tree lives quite as long, for example, but of course there are similarities.
How long do they live, yew trees?
Well, this is a very interesting question, because it really depends on a number of theories, actually. The yew trees, there's a lot of debate about how old the yew trees actually are, and many people have been doing some interesting work on this over the years. There's a possibility that the trees that are left now, the older trees, are thousands and thousands of years old. There's been talk that the Fortingal yew, which is the yew in the centre of Scotland, it's kind of the axis mundi of Scotland, essentially, and Fortingal, could be as much as 9,000 years old. And there's the yew that I spent all the time under is absolutely at a minimum 2,000 years old. And it really depends on how we understand the Ice Age and things like that, and how long have these trees been standing there, because we don't really know. So it's an open question, and I'm one of the parts of the research that I'm doing is trying to establish a little bit more of the age of these trees as being a lot older than they currently are estimated as being.
That's very old, obviously, and there are some other old trees from around the world as well. Do you think that inherently? I mean, I'm reminded of a big oak that we have close to where I am. And it's been kept as a kind of, as you mentioned, a kind of a central node of that society for a long time. Do you think that inherently trees, they hold wisdom? They see things obviously through the ages as men come and go of age and are born and die, so to speak. Some of these trees are kind of left standing there, witnessing it all. What do you think, Michael?
I think that's a very good point, and I think that is the case. I think there's a kind of, let's call it, maybe we could call it amorphic resonance or something. But the yew trees, particularly, and the one that I spent time under, it folds space around itself. It essentially grows back into the ground and creates a chamber, almost a sealed chamber. And we know that the bark gives off a hallucinogenic toxin to the yew. So there's this kind of altered space under the tree, and certainly my experience was, and drawing on my own experience, was that there was an incredible layers and layers of of experience and layers of vision that were certainly transpersonal. They were not about me. They were certainly images and stories that took place under that tree in the past, and certainly it was as a kind of a holder, a keeper of memory, particularly the use, and something about the function of enfolded space, the function of folding space and creating an inside that's different from the outside. The gesture of that, I think, is very, very profound, and something about that as being a holder, a keeper of ancient memory.
Well, that is interesting, because that reminds me of the iconography of the Yggdrasil, the world tree, the axis mundi, in one way, where you can see this kind of internal sphere, and then you have a tip and a bottom, and even in between there sometimes is depicted a rainbow bridge, as they call it, Bifrost it's called in Norse, the Old Norse language. But we can talk more specifically about that later, the connection between the yew tree and the world tree and Yggdrasil and all that as well, Michael. Why don't we just talk generally a little bit about your personal experience with this, your own story of sickness, and then the consequent healing with the aid of a yew tree, and I guess that this was the one that you got familiar with in Scotland. Then is that correct?
Yes, a single female tree, yew tree in Scotland, in the southeast of Scotland, not too far from the city of Edinburgh, in fact, probably about 45 minutes drive. But for me, if I can sort of begin a little bit of the story, how I came to it, the tree was unknown to me. I mean, the yew tree was something that was not on my mind. I mean, I'd come out of art school and was very involved in a very sort of cosmopolitan life in Edinburgh, very much involved in the art world, and not really particularly spending time in the sort of more mystical frame. And I was more interested in Marxist aesthetics, for example, than I was in sort of spiritual practices. And leaving art school is often a difficult experience for people, because you don't really know where you're going. So a lot of unemployment. So during that period of time after art school, a friend of mine had suggested that we try and earn some money. And interestingly enough, his name is Ewan, which actually means yew tree. Mm. And so all of these connections begin to get more and more kind of involved. So we went to the very north of Scotland, a place called Thurso, which actually means Thor's River. And we went up there to work on a tree planting job, which is kind of ironic. And to kind of keep the story reasonably brief, this place up in Thurso was very denuded, very depressed economy, very denuded earth. We were working on a tree plantation, which was really essentially kind of was used as a kind of tax dodge for wealthy people, and the trees were never really grown very much. They were cut down and then they were replanted. So the earth was very, very, very sort of tired, and it was also very close to a nuclear reprocessing facility called Dounreay. Mm-hmm. It was a really cheery place, and very bleak place to be around. And we were in the middle of nowhere in a field in a tiny caravan with no water, no heating, no lighting. It was a bleak experience. And we were sharing another caravan with a bunch of New Zealanders who were desperately trying to get back to New Zealand, who'd spent all their money in London, completely broke, and trying to earn some money. Then a hippie bus arrived with a bunch of hippies from. One of them was on the run from the law. We were such a bunch of misfits up there in this little place, but very close to the nuclear reprocessing centre. And that was the first. There was an experience that occurred there for me, which turned my life upside down, actually. And would you like me to talk a little bit about that experience?
Absolutely, that would be great.
Well, I was very aware. I mean, I've always been a sensitive person, so I was aware that this land was not happy, and there was definitely, of course, when you're near nuclear processing centre, you don't feel good. It was not that long after Chernobyl, in fact. So we were all conscious of this kind of damage that could be caused. So in the middle of one night, I woke up in an absolute, total blind panic, clutching at my throat. I wasn't able to breathe. I wasn't able to inhale any air, and I was had absolutely no idea what was happening. I was in a state of panic, thrashing around in my sleeping bag, trying to get out to find out what was going on. And I realized that there was this acrid, burning smell in the caravan, this horrendous, sulphurous, heavy, thick smell. But more than that, there was a pressure to the atmosphere, almost as though the space around, inside the caravan around me, was behaving almost like a fluid. There was a pressure of almost being as though you would feel as though you were underwater. And it was very, very unpleasant situation. And I felt as though this liquid, if you like, was actually being absorbed by my body. So I was actually breathing this liquid into my lungs. And it was a horrendous experience. And it was burning. It felt like a sort of burning sensation going into my nostrils and into my throat. And of course, very quickly, it's amazing how quickly you become irrational in situations like that, thinking to yourself, this is serious, and I don't know what it is, and I'm dying. I don't have much time left. And what was amazing to me is how quickly you process that and how quickly you become lucid.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very lucid within the panic, within the anxiety, and I was convinced I was dying. This was the end. And how the brain works, in those situations where you have a million thoughts going on at the same time through this incredible upheaval, that maybe there was a leak at the nuclear plant, we were all going to die, this was a nuclear disaster. All these things were racing through my mind as I was inhaling this fluid, and it was very painful and very compressed. So I gradually was able to drag myself across the floor, and I have to get across that I was in a state of real panic and sort of clawing my way across the caravan to get to the door. And I knew that I needed to get to the outside of this caravan. But I began to realize that there was something outside, that whatever it was that was controlling this was actually outside. And not only that, it was controlling the entire environment. So it felt as though it was breathing me, that something outside of the caravan, some kind of energy form or some kind of being, was actually in control of the actual material of the environment, the actual substance of what was around me and what was within me, as though it was controlling my cells, even the contraction and expansion of my cells. And that was the most terrifying aspect of all, was feeling watched and feeling that there was another intelligence at work inside my body. It was there have been instances of this a little after that, and nothing as extreme as this particular first time. And I felt I was being not so much taken over, but just absolutely had been absorbed by another being who was beyond any description. We can think of power, but this was beyond anything that we could possibly imagine. And I managed to get to the door of the caravan ajar and was able to look out in the dark, and of course I could see nothing. But there was a really strong presence of a sort of breathing mass, sort of almost as though the entire atmosphere was at its command. And I felt this being this energy form is going to kill me, and I am not going to survive this, and this is the end. And there was a moment of drawing back, like a serpent drawing back to strike, and this entire energy form sort of whipped back. It's funny how you know this is happening, although you can't see anything. It was just a sense of how the atmosphere was being shifted as a kind of pulling back, and a stillness and a sucking in of energy slightly, as though there was it was mustering this potency ready to really strike at me. And just at the very tail end of this gesture of moving back and resting in a kind of stillness for a moment before the attack, there was a pop, real loud pop, and it was gone. And I fell to the floor, released from this embrace, and crawled back to my sleeping bag and was weeping uncontrollably for hours, and sweating and sort of obviously whatever it was releasing from my body. And I woke up in the morning, was completely exhausted, and nobody else had any experiences as I had. And I took a really close scrutiny of the earth around the caravan. No footprints, no sign of anything being moved. Very perplexing to me then, and still perplexing to me now. Although I do relate it to some aspect of the yew tree, but perhaps that's something we can draw out later if you would like. But that to me was a sign that something was going to happen and was happening in my life, which I had no control over whatsoever, and my health began to deteriorate quite considerably at that time, and it got gradually worse.
And so, as you're talking here as well, I'm also reading that obviously in the central Himalayas, this plant or tree then is used as a treatment for breast and ovary cancer as well. There's obviously health benefits that seem to be related to this the tree, and I don't know personally how that is, how it's being, if it's processed in any way, or if they eat portions of the tree or drink tea out of it or whatever. But how did you go about, I guess, then healing yourself from this in terms of the relationship with the tree, Michael?
Yeah, yes, I mean, definitely we can also talk a little bit more about the curative elements of the yew later too. But in terms of directly for me, obviously I knew nothing about that at that time, and had no idea of what a yew tree was. I went back to Edinburgh after this experience and feeling very confused and very disoriented. And bit by bit, a couple of other experiences occurred, which may be other stories for another time. And I was really fairly challenged. It was very difficult for me to live a normal life. Very difficult to manage myself, hard to pay bills, hard to remember things, hard to drive, really feeling as though the entire space around me had been altered. So I had very little depth perception. I couldn't really fix myself. I couldn't orient myself to anything. It was really a flux. And I was continuously dizzy. And it was a very, very difficult time, and my weight was falling off. So I was clearly unable to manage. And luckily for me, a friend actually became into a relationship with, she rescued me, essentially, and realized this person can't cope, and somebody needs to look after this person. And
how long had you been being like this before you got some help?
Couple of years I was floundering around.
Wow,
and
really?
and losing confidence and wondering why I wasn't coping and why was I making so many mistakes in life, and how was I not able to do the simplest tasks? What was happening to me? And beginning to have very, very alarming physical symptoms of incredible pains in my organs and awful headaches and just contorted feelings. Very, very I even was tested I was working for a non-profit at the time, and I requested my job to be reduced dramatically. So they said I actually worked with adults with mental illness, mental health problems in an arts project. So they sent me to one of the board of directors, who was a psychiatrist in one of the major hospitals at the time, to check me out,
right.
to make sure that I wasn't really really becoming mentally ill. So he luckily said, you clearly are struggling, but you're definitely not mentally ill. So it was a difficult time. So this person, after this couple of years, basically just moved me out of the city of Edinburgh into a lovely location in the southeast of Scotland, near the sea, in East Lothian, which is east of an East Lothian part of east of the Lothians, which is the region which contains Edinburgh. And there I was, and she helped me to heal, change my diet, really, really fundamental things that I was not able to manage myself. And one night she said to me, you really should go out and enjoy yourself a little bit. I mean, you've been kind of holed up in this cottage now for however long it was, and why don't you go to the Red Lion, which was the pub at that time in the local village, and I'll call my friend Bob, who ironically was a tree surgeon. So Bob took me to the pub, and it was a wild little place. Halfway through the night, he said to me, hey, have you seen the yew tree on the land up there? I said, what? The what? He said, the yew tree. It's this amazing, incredible tree that everybody it's our famous, it's our kind of our celebrity in the area. I take everybody to that tree. I said, no, I have no idea even what you're talking about. He said, right, that's it, get in the truck. And he was not sober. And so threw me in the truck, and off we went up this windy road to find this tree. And it was dark, and we were stumbling around, and we came upon what looked like an enormous bush with a little black hole in it. And he said, shove me through the hole. It was his kind of brusque, macho kind of initiatory gesture.
Right.
So he threw me through this hole, and next thing I knew, I'm walking, stumbling, bent over double through this constricted tunnel of wood.
Mm.
And it's jagged, and it's jagging into me, and I'm thinking, what am I doing? Why am I here? It's the middle of the night, and I'm stumbling around inside a tunnel. I don't know where I'm going, what's going on, and I'm bent over, and it's freezing cold, and I'm feeling this branches all sides of me jagging into my body because I can't see. And when I lift my head up, I'm feeling the ceiling of this tunnel, all of branches. And this tunnel starts to rise and rise and rise in a gradual incline. And it's becoming colder, and I'm feeling like I'm moving into something very, very deep. Even though I'm rising, it feels like I'm going into something here which is something I've never experienced before. And it's probably 40 to 45 feet long tunnel, and it begins to open up, and I feel these steel rails. Steel rails have been placed there to keep the wood from falling. And I begin to pull myself through the rail and realize that I'm in a chamber, and it's a very sealed chamber, and it's made of living wood. And I realize in the center I see the trunk of the tree, and I make my way towards the trunk and realize that there's a ceiling of branches over me that are rising from 12, 15 feet from the trunk of the tree, moving out about another 15 feet, and then beautiful arcs descending back down into the earth and creating a sealed chamber. And it was a very, very profound and deep experience, and I felt a deep recognition that it was like a feeling of I am here. I'm somehow home. I'm in a place that's safe. And I hadn't felt any peace in my body or any peace in my mind for such a long time, and it felt like this was a place that was going to become extraordinarily important to me. And I really feel that I was called there. And a couple of minutes later, the tree surgeon came stomping in brusquely, and in his own way, he was very proud of the tree in a very different way. And they explained to me that it was a female tree, and that the trees are able to be male and female, or female. And this was a very old tree, and I was in the presence of a divinity to some extent. So even he could see that, even he could sense the divine nature of this tree. Somebody who was not at all oriented to that. So the next day I came back, and I went back the following day, and 10 years later I was a new person.
Pretty interesting story there, huh? It's to me as well. It sounds like because I was reading about this in terms of the sickness, obviously, what you think that might have been. I think I read that you described it as possibly a spiritual sickness. It wasn't directly related to anything physical as such. But what do you think now, with some hindsight?
I think it was a spiritual illness, and over the time I feel that it's possible that it was even, to some extent, it was even engendered by the it sounds strange to say this, and I'm aware that it's a strange thing to say, but it was possibly engendered by the you in a way that was brought me to transformation, and I almost had to be destroyed before I was rebuilt in a typical sort of shamanic initiatory fashion. Although that whole subject right there is a whole subject in itself, which needs to be dismantled and reevaluated in a way that's another story. But for me, it was definitely a spiritual illness. That, looking back on it, because I did go to hospital when I was rescued by my friend. She advised me very strongly, you need to go to hospital and get some proper medical tests. So I did that, and I went to hospital on several occasions, and I was tested for just about everything you can possibly imagine. And they could find absolutely nothing wrong with me. They couldn't figure it out. They kept putting me on scales. They were totally perplexed. I was too light. They kept weighing me and checking the scales. There's something wrong. Why are you so light? Why why are you alive, essentially, and but nothing was proving to be, there was nothing conclusive, and they eventually gave me the label of chronic fatigue syndrome, which back in those days they would tend to do anyway when they were unable to establish any, give any diagnosis that was,
Right.
So, and they couldn't say ME because they couldn't find any inflamed nerve tissue, so I was given this diagnosis of chronic fatigue and sent packing, and that was really all they could do for me. So it was kind of up to me. So, but I began to get visions, and there were a lot of out-of-body experiences beginning to happen. But I knew that again, this was something beyond myself that was coming into my body, my soma, my psyche, and I had no control over this. And there was something far beyond my scope as an individual, and it was crashing into my existence and creating this incredible transformation that was I had no choice but to pay attention to what was going on. I don't think I would have survived otherwise.
Do you think that all of this then potentially might not have been an accident? I guess it was it was meant to happen in some way, for the maybe from the point of view that you personally needed to rediscover the relationship to the yew tree, possibly, and help to bring more attention to this again. Do you think that could be a possibility here?
I think it's a distinct possibility, and the fact that I was the conditions of my life were open enough for me to be able to spend that amount of time at a tree almost every day. I mean, it's quite an extraordinary. I mean, how often in life do we have these kinds of times? It just doesn't happen. And the fact that the sickness broke my life to pieces, where there was so few things I could do, even though I'm a very stubborn person, I still managed to do things that I think back and I wonder how I managed it. But it was definitely an opportunity that, and I feel that when it came to the point of emigrating to the USA, which was the last thing that I imagined I would ever do, I really saw myself as being a protector of the yew tree, and I did actually have visions of those of the past. I actually could see several figures in the past who had been these protectors up until probably about the 17th or so century, where I felt this kind of gap where the tree had been kind of caretaken, obviously had been trimmed and maintained, but there hadn't been this particular role, this magical role connected to the tree. The humans had lost the capacity. So it was almost the tree was bringing this back and wanting to bring back to our consciousness this some of its message, which is really some of what I feel I've been doing, and that's where some of the other aspects of my work have been coming in. But coming over to the USA was the last thing on my agenda, and I remember being at the tree just shortly before I emigrated, and and sitting under the tree and being very upset that, why am I doing this? Why am I leaving this tree? And of course, when we have these altered experiences, we convert them into clear language later. But the powerful meaning to me was given from the tree, which all often with me were very somatic, visceral kinds of experiences that spoke to my body. From the tree was a sense of, I've been here a long time, and I'm going to be here a long time. You, my friend, are not. So I need you to go into the heart of the beast, if you like, and go and talk about this, and write and do your work, and I'll be sort of there. And I do feel that I'm somehow very connected and very at one with the tree. I mean, I feel that I often feel very sort of there's a very odd sensation in my body occasionally that feels very not organic in the way that we understand it. And I certainly feel that there's another intelligence that I share in some ways in my body, and it's again a strange thing to say, but it's a very unusual experience, and I've got used to it over the years.
Do you have any more clarity today in regards to this entity or this force that you described earlier that kind of, I guess in one way, then kick-started all of this?
Well, I have had some insights, because certain sort of rituals and events that I saw taking place under the yew tree itself implied to me that there was there was a sort of a similar there was a similar energetic, a similar feeling of this very, very dark, not evil energy, but a very, very dark aspect that was connected to the tree. I mean, the tree is a tree of both life and of death. I mean, and that's its power. It's a kind of it embodies both of those. And I think that the more I began to sense this sort of viscous, I call it like a sort of viscous energy that was similar to this elemental, let's call it an elemental spirit from the north of Scotland. There were certain aspects of it that kept showing up in visions under the tree and somatic experiences under the tree, and actual visual sensations, visual visions I had under the tree too. So I began to make the connection that this was potentially an aspect of the tree itself, because when you look at the landscape of the British Isles, you see that the tree was once extraordinarily prominent throughout, and it was destroyed. But you know, it's very, very possible that the yew tree was an absolutely venerated tree across your region, but also across the British Isles.
Yeah.
And you know, we lost a lot of it. And there's a sense that that imprint of that energy of that tree is embedded in the place names throughout the UK. The place names really tell, I mean, the research I've done, they tell you that the yew was once a sacred tree that was prevalent throughout the United Kingdom and Ireland. And I think that there's an imprint of that in the land.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about why it was destroyed and by who, and maybe tying in the weapons development connection here as well, which is interesting, obviously.
Absolutely. I mean, for in terms of just giving some, and maybe to give some reality to the place names, for example, places that people will know about. For example, Iona, island of Iona, really means island of the yew tree, and there's so many places in the UK. There's, you know, I wouldn't give you a whole list, but there's so many. York, for example, was called by the Romans Eboracum, which means yew town. Mm-hmm. So there's wherever you go, there is a yew tree. There's a place name with a yew tree within it. And you know, Idavol, if that's the right pronunciation. You know, we're talking about
in Sweden here, Uddevalla.
Yep.
You mean? Yeah.
Yep, yeah, the Yew Hill, and Asgard was located in the Yew Valley, and there's a huge amount connected to the world tree, which I know we will talk about.
Yes.
So what happened to the yew tree? Well, I think that obviously there was the early Christian settlements that some yews survived, where there was obviously a very powerful centre where there was already a yew tree, and perhaps the early church sites were planted, were established around the original tree there. So often the yew trees predate the churches by a long, long way. But of course, others were destroyed, and significant amounts were destroyed in Ireland because it was such a powerful practice and such a powerful centre for belief that, of course, it had to be to some extent destroyed. So I think it began then, and then we get into the 13th century or so, where we have, for example, Edward I and Longshanks, you know, who began the long campaign of English warfare, and we have, you know, the battles against the Scots, for example, and Battle of Falkirk and things like that. And by the time, you know, we get to I think when we get to sort of probably, I think is it Edward III, mm-hmm. get into the 100 Years' War of 14th to 15th century, we have this situation where 7,000 archers, for example, could shoot 70,000 arrows per minute. So we have this growing need for the longbow, and the longbow came from the heartwood of the yew tree. So the yews were destroyed for their you know, to create these incredibly powerful yew bows, and to the extent that, you know, around about the time of Henry IV, there was a compulsory import of yew wood from the rest of Europe because they were beginning to exhaust the supplies of yew wood in the UK. And there's even, I could read from you here, even certain edicts that said things like, for example, enter upon the lands of private individuals and cut down yew or any other wood for the public service.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, it was okay to cut these trees down. It was sanctioned. And I often wonder that this was a political. Obviously, it was used as a weapon for war, but there was also a political reason just to eradicate the living memory of these trees completely. And it just so happened that the tree was used for warfare at the same time. So it was a convenient ploy just to get rid of this tree altogether.
Why this campaign though? Do you think we know that it's connected to Celtic and Druidic ceremonies, the tree, and it has a history of being connected, obviously, more with the quote pagan unquote world in that sense. And do you think that could be the reason as well to eradicate knowledge from the past in that sense? And one of the connections to this was the sacred tree. What do you think, Michael?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right, and I know that there's other people done some work with this, and I know that Michael Tsarian has talked about this a little bit too. About how the Druids were pretty much they were destroyed, and they had a very highly evolved series of practices that I felt myself being under that tree for so long that I was able to some extent embody. And I feel that there was a very evolved practice that was ultimately involved an understanding of our origins as a source of healing. There was a kind of embryological component, I think, to the early sort of Druidic knowledge, a way of returning to source to find this kind of healing, rejuvenative quality, and a series of practices that involved meditations and particular ways of working with the body that were probably quite threatening, and were very powerful techniques. I think that was just one aspect of it, but I think that was something that was gradually destroyed with the Druid knowledge, the Druidic knowledge. Although there's argument that really the Christianity in a sense is based on Druidism itself in another way.
Yeah.
So that is there, and you see the yew tree though showing up, and I think that you see it in codified form in certain alchemical and some hermetic writings. And you can look and see the way the yew rune was morphed, how you can see sometimes the yew rune being connected with the stork in Germany and in Holland, certain symbols. So again, clearly with birth, and then you see the yew tree kind of being morphed and the yew rune being connected with the tree of life rosette, and that shows up in the Templars and shows up in Rosslyn Chapel and all these places. So I think the yew tree continued to be there, but it was kind of, it went underground into sort of codified form. So perhaps some of the practices, some of this altered physiology, or what I call sort of occult embryology, was continued as a practice, but was very underground, possibly. And I felt myself that some of the work I'm doing now feels to me to be, in a sense, a kind of a return and a sort of renewal of some of that work, and I find that very exciting.
What do you think that there could be? Well, could we call the yew tree a holy tree? I'm thinking of the kind of obvious connection to the wands of the wizard or the magician's wand, in that sense, that maybe there was a peaceful use for the tree as well in that sense. What do you think, Michael?
Oh, I think very much so. I think that the tree was primarily used for peaceful means, and I mean, it's not. Some people do say they may have been sacrificed. It's possible, but I think generally speaking, the tree speaks about rejuvenation. Its gesture, its entire gesture of how it grows, is really about rejuvenation, and that would have been venerated, because reading nature was a different experience for our ancestors. I mean, there was a reading of the gesture of nature, getting inside of the gesture of nature that people like Goethe later kind of rediscovered in a sense. But we're talking about something very, very ancient that was really taking examples from nature and really understanding, getting into, rather than jumping into some other dimension, jumping deeper into nature. So I think the yew tree was a great teacher, and you can look at certain bone carvings and seals from all around the world, particularly Crete, and some from Siberia, and some from I think there's one from Siberia. There's a bunch of carvings and images that really demonstrate the connections to the womb and to the yew tree, and they're very compelling. And I would direct anybody who wants to research this any further to look at the work of Fred Hageneder, who has written a beautiful book about the yew tree, Yew: A History, and he has done some fantastic work to uncover some of this. So it's clearly there, these images are there, and they directly connect the tree to rejuvenation. So to answer your question, I think yes, the tree was used very much for incubatory, initiatory rites, healing, and also for the connection with the kingship and rulership is very clear, particularly in Ireland. But I think primarily as a healing tree, a holy tree.
Also, to make another reference in terms of modern movies and things like that, in The Fountain, don't know if you've seen that, but Darren Aronofsky, there's a tree there, obviously, in a sphere in the movie, beautifully portrayed in that sense, and they're one of the characters are eating of the bark in that sense in that movie, in a way to kind of sustain life, but I also think that it's in the movie it's depicted as one of the females in the movie dies, but her spirit in one way is captured in the tree, and she is the tree in one way. She's related to the tree, and he's eating of it. Have you seen that movie, by the way?
I did. I was absolutely amazed when I saw that film, because it felt to me that I was amazed by it. It was incredible, because it was so resonant for me of a lot of my experience, and the fact that we know that the tree is aspects of the tree are used to cure cancer is really quite fascinating. So this tree of life or death, it depends how we as humanity, how we see our own image mirrored in the tree. We will respond to the tree in that way. So the character in the film is sustaining. He's eating that. He's attempting a process of regeneration. He's keeping a connection with her spirit and her soul. And I think that the images in that film are very, very yew-like, extraordinarily so.
Yeah. And
I wonder how much the filmmakers were aware of the lore and the mythology of the yew tree.
Well, pretty read up on it. It seems like when I look at it, and okay, I mean, again, it could be a reference to any of the other mythologies about other trees around the world, as we mentioned, the Axis Mundi, the World Tree, the Yggdrasil, and a number of other ones. And it's been argued, obviously, back and forth for a long time what kind of trees these were. I know that the one in Uddevalla in Sweden that you mentioned has also been argued. Was that a yew tree, or was it a big oak, or what kind of tree was it? But do you think that in most cases, at least from the point of view of Norse mythology, that it specifically was a yew tree and not an oak that some other people argue?
Yeah, not an oak or an ash. A needle ash, I think, was the mistranslation, possibly from the Voluspa, right? I think there was it was often known as a needle ash.
Yeah, an ash. I've seen that too.
Yes, but I think that I'm of the opinion that it was undoubtedly a yew tree, and I'm not alone in that opinion. And just in the way that it's described, it seems so much more that it would be a yew tree that would have been the Axis Mundi, or the center of the community, given the fact that it would have been there for thousands of years, holding the center of that community, and a center of teaching and of learning and of sacred practice, and also a container. I think that a lot of these trees now, the joy and the wonder of the two trees in the tree I spent time under, and there's one very close by, they both contain space. Now, It's really, really rare to see that. So a lot of people miss a gesture and a dimension of the U that would once have existed. And because their branches get cut, they get tampered with, they're not allowed to get back down into the earth, which is a strategy of their survival and of their longevity. So I think that your image earlier of Yggdrasil as a kind of series of worlds that contain a dimension unto itself, a series of dimensions, and also the tree in the movie The Fountain, and surrounded by a sphere. It's all pointing to the same thing. It's this contained womb-like birthing aspect of the yew tree.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's, for me, that it really Yggdrasil must be a yew.
And in connection to the Yggdrasil, it's mentioned that it's often the tree exists in 9 worlds, which could be interpreted in either as in 9 dimensions, or we have this continuous reference throughout history and many ancient cultures to 9 underworlds, or we have the 9 levels of Dante's Inferno and things like that too. It seems to be a classic number that comes up in relationship to this. And do you think that it could be something to that? Because again, if we look at the iconography of some of the images, it looks very much like what you described. We can see the roots going down, obviously. Then we have a sphere in the center, in the middle of it, where often another world is kind of depicted, and then we have the top of it, pretty much. And for instance, if we tie this in with the juniper tree again, I've heard for years that they are known to grow at certain vortex points, if you will. There's energetic lines that they favor, and they're kind of picky, if you will, with the sites that they choose. So I guess what I'm asking is, do you think it could be the same when it comes to the yew tree in one way, that this could be like a, well, if you want to look at it that way, a kind of a interdimensional portal, if you will, and they usually often put themselves, or they make sure that they only grow on sites or places where it's actually is high energetically, or vortex points, Michael.
Absolutely, I think you put it very, very well. And you know, for just one thing to add to that is that a lot of the yew trees in Scotland and England, there is a well deep below that, a water source, and so this is kind of underground, sort of sacred well that. But even in Victorian times, under the tree that I spent time, they actually had they used to have a well pump there. They used to actually take water from that well under the tree. So, and then to connect that to the 9, I mean, the 9, the sacred number 9 comes up all the time connected to the yew tree. I mean, the whole thing of Heimdall, and you can help me with the pronunciation.
Heimdall, yes.
Yes, Heimdall. And now he has 9 mothers, 9 sisters, who potentially are yew roots. These are the 9 mothers are possibly yew roots themselves. They're possibly 9 yew trees. So, and Heimdall, I think, has been argued as one way of reading that could be actually the word actually means, his name means world tree. So we could be seeing here there's the whole idea of him having 9 mothers, 9 sisters who were actually yew trees or yew roots. Who nourished the world tree, the 9 yew roots who nourished the world tree. So he's born from 9 yew roots, and he's also the father of humanity, and the guardian of the apple of life and death, which is also connected potentially to the yew tree. So the 9 shows up a lot, and I think for me it was interesting how it was 9 years, again, that I spent, particularly 3 periods of 3 years. It was 3 years, then another 3 years, and another 3 years. It was really 9 years for me where there were the main sort of thematics of what happened for me, and a year at the end where I was definitely getting ready to kind of re-enter society in a much more an easier way. So there was 9 for me, and also, of course, the connections with Woden and the 9 and being hung from the tree. So it shows up all the time. It's very, very interesting. Very interesting.
Would you say that potentially then it's a kind of it's been a gestation period for you from being, well, dying in one sense, but being born into a new life, if you will, in that way?
Yes, in more ways than one. I absolutely feel that, and you know, and also when you look at some alchemical texts, you'll see that the creating the Philosopher's Stone took exactly, strangely enough, exactly the same time for the development of a baby in the womb. So there's all of these connections that that you can link back to the, that sometimes tenuously that can be linked back to the yew tree. But I definitely see the connection with the development of a human being. This whole idea of returning to the undifferentiated state, to the prima materia, to the original water of life, if you like, and which is really embodied by the yew tree in its very gestures. The fact that there's a water source beneath it, there's this womb-like container, it's able to regenerate itself. There's carvings that have come from it that are specifically about regeneration and about returning to a womb, or returning to the first cause, or the beginning of the universe, or the creation of the universe. So I think that it's all about the tree of origin as well as the tree of life. It's a tree of sort of creation mythology, I believe, that we've lost in the West, and it underpinned a creation mythology that we no longer have so much access to.
Michael, I want to talk more with you about some of the things that we haven't had time for yet in terms of the embryonic, connection more to what you've been experiencing. Also something known as craniosacral therapy that has been kind of an extension to some of the work that you've been doing. This has ties into the Rudolf Steiner school as well, embryology from there. So we have much more to talk about here in our next hour, Michael. But I want to wrap things up here for the first hour, talk a little bit about some of the upcoming events, and also obviously where people can go to find out more information about your work. We have your website, yewshamanism.com, and we haven't really addressed shamanism overall either, so that's another point I want to ask you about later on. But yewshamanism.com, that's one of the sites. Then there is the Sacred Yew Institute, or just sacredyewinstitute.com website as well. And you obviously have upcoming now in August, you are going to attend the second ARC convention in Bath. I mean, Karen Sawyer has written about your story, we can mention, in her book Soul Companions, and she's also putting together the second ARC convention. We were at the first one. We won't be attending the second one here, but you will be there speaking. Is there anything you want to mention about these things, upcoming events, and the book by Karen, Michael?
Just briefly, yes. I mean, I think Karen's amazing, and she approached me about this book, whatever it was, 2 or 3 years ago, and it was a very exciting project. And Karen has been really working hard to bring awareness and to create these wonderful events. And so I think people should go onto the website there, arcconvention.org, and if they can, should come along. There's some great speakers there, and I think it will be a wonderful event. And you can, I'm sure, testify to that, having been at the first ARC convention.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a great event, and I think the second one is going to be very good as well, if not even better. It's always nice to have get the ball rolling on these things as well, and I definitely encourage people to head on over there, because again, there's a lot of great speakers there, and for anyone who wants to have more information about the event, obviously, again, as you mentioned, Michael, the website is arcconvention.org. And then they can take a look at the book Soul Companions for more about your story specifically. But also, again, tell us a little bit about your websites here briefly as well, Yew Shamanism and sacredyewinstitute.com.
Well, the Yew Shamanism website is a little more like a sort of personalized website, where there's a little more story about my experiences, and a little bit more about what I'm trying to define as Yew Shamanism, and linking that to the embryology just a little bit, and giving a little background to the yew tree. So that's a sort of separate a website. The Sacred Yew Institute is much more of a sort of educational website that's geared toward sort of bringing attention to the training that I'm offering in biodynamic craniosacral therapy, and ultimately I'll be adding some more trainings connected to the Yew shamanic work in this too, and the embryology actually in time. So the two are slightly different. One's more personalized, more a story, much more text. In fact, a lot of text. And the Sacred Yew Institute I spent all the time under is absolutely at a minimum 2,000 years old, and it really depends on how we understand the Ice Age and things like that, and how long have these trees been standing there, because we don't really know. So it's an open question, and one of the parts of the research that I'm doing is trying to establish a little bit more of the age of these trees as being a lot older than they currently are estimated as being.
That's very old, obviously, and there are some other old trees from around the world as well. Do you think that inherently? I mean, I'm reminded of a big oak that we have close to where I am, and it's been kept as a kind of, as you mentioned, a kind of a central node of that society for a long time. Do you think that inherently trees they hold wisdom? They see things obviously through the ages as men come and go of age and are born and die.
Led to one, let's say, in the southeast of Scotland, and the yew tree is when they're left to their own devices, they'll tend to grow back down towards the ground. So literally, they are the tree that grows upwards and downwards at the same time, as it's reflected in the yew rune, the 13th rune. And what happens is that the tree creates clones of itself that grow back into the ground and create basically, essentially new growth. So they continuously regenerate themselves. So the yew tree is an example to us humans of a continual process of regeneration and continuous healing. And I think that's something that we should really be paying attention to, and as a symbol, but also as a hopeful connection with the natural world.
Yeah, I see some similarities between when I look at the yew tree and the juniper tree. Do you know if there's any relation there between these two trees?
I think,
so to speak, some of these trees are kind of left standing there, witnessing it all. What do you think, Michael?
I think that's a very good point, and I think that is the case. I think there's a kind of, let's call it, maybe we could call it amorphic resonance or something. But the yew trees, particularly, and the one that I spent time under, it folds space around itself. It essentially grows back into the ground and creates a chamber, almost a sealed chamber. And we know that the bark gives off a hallucinogenic toxin to the yew. So there's this kind of altered space under the tree. And certainly my experience was, and drawing on my own experience, was that there was an incredible layers and layers of experience and layers of vision that were certainly transpersonal. They were not about me. There were certainly images and stories that took place under that tree in the past, and certainly it was as a kind of a holder, a keeper of memory, particularly the yews, and something about I think there's some kind of relationship, but not being a sort of an arborist. I mean, I'm not exactly sure of the connections, but you can certainly from a distance you can certainly often mistake them, and but there are definite differences. I don't think the juniper tree lives quite as long, for example, but of course there are similarities.
How long do they live, yew trees?
Well, this is a very interesting question, because it really depends on a number of theories, actually. The yew trees, there's a lot of debate about how old the yew trees actually are, and many people have been doing some interesting work on this over the years. There's a possibility that the trees that are left now, the older trees, are thousands and thousands of years old. There's been talk that the Fortingal yew, which is the yew in the centre of Scotland, it's kind of the axis mundi of Scotland, essentially, and Fortingal, could be as much as 9,000 years old. And there's the yew that...
We're going to get into your personal story a little bit later here, but I think generally maybe we could talk about the yew tree first and kind of set the outline of what this is for people who are living in areas where the yew tree cannot be found, and we can explain a little bit about where it is, how it looks, and basically how you got onto this track in terms of your personal story. But tell us just a little bit about the yew tree first, Michael.
Well, thanks, Henrik. It's a delight to be on the show, and I love the work you're doing. So, yeah, the yew tree is a very fascinating being, and the yew tree is left to its own devices without any human tampering. The yew tree is potentially an immortal tree, which is one very significant aspect of the tree that has always fascinated me. And the trees that are existing now, and very few of them left, and they're what would have been their natural state. There are very few of those now, and I was very fortunate to come across one, or to be